I am an English foreign language educator from Argentina, and today I will discuss what it means to approach English language teaching from a critical and anti-racist perspective. I will first explain some key theoretical concepts, and then I will show a pedagogical proposal designed for teenage and adult learners in order to show you how this perspective can be applied in the classroom. Okay, so let's begin. We're going to start with some reflection time. You will see some pictures taken from English textbooks, and I will read some questions on specific aspects. The idea is that you can relate those questions with the material that you use in your English classes, or you can also guide that thinking with the pictures that you are seeing in the screen. We're going to start with the first aspect, that is race. The question reads, are different racial groups well represented in our textbooks? When non-white characters appear, how are they shown? Are they in positions of power? Are they shown in stereotypical roles? Which roles? The second aspect is class. Which social class is most often represented in English textbooks? Consider topics like holidays, hobbies, sports, or cities. What kind of vacations are shown? Which sports or cities are highlighted? Who has access to these experiences? Who lives in these places or neighborhoods? And the last one is on language. When we teach American or British English, which variety are we actually teaching? Do all Americans or all British speak the same way? So, as you may see, all this, the material that we use in ELT classrooms reflect and shape certain perspectives on the English language and culture, right? Now, this brings us to a key question, another question, that is, how are these ideas about linguistic and cultural practices in the English-speaking world constructed, right? Meaning, where do they come from? So, in order to better understand this, I will now turn to some theoretical insights that can help us analyze these patterns more critically. Okay. Libby Green argues that there is a common belief that certain types of English are considered more English than others, and that there is one perfect, proper way to speak English. This is known as the Standard Language Ideology, SLI, right, which proposes that one idealized nation state has one perfect form of the language, right, a homogeneous spoken language. Now, the interesting point she raises is when in the context of the United States, right, when we talk about this idealized standard English, right, what does it look like? Right? Meaning, who speaks that form? Many social linguists who are also interested in this type of questions argue that the so-called standard English reflects and legitimizes white, male, upper middle class, mainstream ways of speaking English, right? And here is when race comes into play. What is important to understand here and to see is that what is known as white mainstream English is not linguistically superior to any other form of English, right? It is considered standard because it comes from the language habits of the dominant race, class, and gender in US society, as Smitherman explains in his work. So, white mainstream English, right, becomes that ideal, that goal, that ideal benchmark that we want our students to achieve, right? Whereas other varieties of English, and if we think about the context of the United States, we can think about, for example, African American English, right, are seen or are treated as a symbol of linguistic and intellectual inferiority, okay? So in relation to this, from a racial linguistic perspective, Rosa and Flores reminds us that the perception of someone as a speaker of a prestigious or non-prestigious linguistic variety is not determined by their language use, that is to say, the form, the linguistic form, but the racial positioning of their speakers in society. Okay? So, with that being said, the question might be now, why is this relevant to English language teachers? Well, what I suggest thinking is that if this is the only way that we are presenting English, this is the way we present English in our classrooms, right, to our students, then what's the message we are sending to them, right? Are we helping dismantling unequal power structures in society, or are we reinforcing them instead? Okay. So on that note, what I'm gonna show you now is we're gonna move to the practice section, right? And I'm gonna show you an example of a pedagogical sequence that I designed for teenage and adult learners, right? And this sequence encourages us, teachers, to work with more authentic materials and to carefully and critically choose those resources, that is to say, books, songs, poems, movies, that allow us to create opportunities for meaningful discussions on language, power, race, and also as well as cultural and linguistic hierarchies in the English-speaking world. Okay. So what I suggest is that we move beyond teaching language skills, right, and we take a step forward by using these materials to create critical thinking in our classes. Okay. So the first thing I suggest is to carefully choose that material that we're going to work with our students. And in order to do that, I suggest considering 4 main aspects. So I'm going to read those aspects and I'm going to read the questions that we can ask ourselves. The first one is representation. Does this material represent diverse voices, particularly those historically marginalized in the English-speaking world? The second one is about content. Does it challenge dominant narratives or provide alternative perspectives on culture, history, or language? The third one is on language. Are different accents, dialects, or varieties of English represented and valued? And the last one is relevance. How does this material connect to students' own experiences, backgrounds, or social political contexts? So once we have our material selected, then what I suggest is thinking about 3 main sections, let's say, in our plan or in our sequence or in any project that we are carrying out. The first one is critical thinking analysis. The second one is connection to our context. And the last one is community outreach. So this is what I call the 3 C's, okay? I'm gonna now explain one by one. But in order to explain that, I will use an example of, I'm gonna show you an example of a sequence with the movie Dark Waters. This is a sequence that I carried out myself with high school students in Argentina. And the movie, I'm gonna read very briefly for you in case you haven't seen the movie, you can be familiar with the plot. It's a drama thriller based on a true story set in West Virginia, United States. It follows Robert Bilott, a lawyer who takes on DuPont, a chemical corporation, after discovering that it has been dumping toxic chemicals into a town's water supply, harming farmers and working class families in the area. As he investigates, he uncovers a massive cover-up linking the pollution to serious health issues in the community. So notice I highlighted certain parts. First, it's based on a true story. It is set in West Virginia, United States, right? Then we're going to see how this affects a community, working class families mainly, right, and farmers in the area. So bear that in mind, that those pieces of information, because they are relevant to the sequence. Okay, so the first one, as I said before, is critical thinking analysis, right? For this movie in particular, I think that the concept of environmental racism is super powerful, right? And this is a great concept to bring to our class and explore it with our students, okay? So what I would suggest here is that depending on the group, the teacher kind of like can decide how to explore this. The teacher can ask the students to do some research. They can do it all together in class. She can or he can provide some definitions in advance. But the idea is that this concept is explored, right? Intentionally and explicitly in class. And then what I suggest is a series of questions for students to connect this concept with what they see in the movie, right? So, for example, questions such as, how is environmental racism reflected in dark waters, right? Think about who is the most affected by the pollution. Consider the characteristics of the affected area, the social class of the people living there, and any patterns of power and privilege you notice. Question number 2, what challenges does the community face when trying to speak up? Are their concerns taken seriously? Are their interests truly defended? Who listens and who ignores them? And the last one, what does the corporation DuPont care about the most, right? So notice that some of these questions have also like a sub-question, right? In order to guide students into this critical thinking, right? And I want to make a stop here and share something that I feel that sometimes it happens to us teachers. Like, we give them questions and like we expect them to come up with a very deep analysis, and we have to understand that critical thinking is a skill that has to be developed, right? And we can do that. We can help our students train that skill, right? And this is one way to do that, right? Guiding that thinking, right? Like, consider this, or bear in mind this aspect, right? And notice this in the movie, right? That's how we can guide that thinking. The second aspect that I would consider for this part is language, right? I think this is a great movie. If we think about the context of the United States, this is a great movie to expose our students to characteristics of Southern accent. So, like, for example, we can find specific phrases, right, or uses of the language that reflect those characteristics. Like, for example, the dropping of the G in the case of fighting, or the use of ain't as opposed to isn't, or the phrase you all, right? And also, we can also like go beyond and ask students explicit questions for them to observe these phrases, right? So we can ask them, in the movie, how do people from West Virginia speak? What expressions or pronunciations features stand out to you? Or have you seen these words or phrases in your English textbooks? Why? Why not? Why do you think some regional accents and dialects are less represented in formal education, right? I think that these explicit interrogations can also be part of our reading guides, or the sequence that we design, okay? And make that analysis very explicit. Okay, the second section is about connecting to our own context, right? And what I suggest here is that we try to make connections between what the students are seeing in the movie and what they are analyzing with their own local context, right? So that we make that content even more meaningful, right? Here I suggest two questions, but you can think about more ideas. The first one reads, can you think of other cases of environmental injustice in your country or community? Or number two, we can ask students to do some research, right? So in my context, it would be research an environmental issue in Argentina that is connected to environmental racism or discrimination. You will analyze the problem, identify the communities affected, explore its causes, and any action that has been taken. Then you will present your findings using a well-organized presentation, okay? And the last one, the last C is community outreach, okay? So what I suggest here is that students have a moment or have the opportunity to educate others, right? This could be the school community, the family members, neighborhoods where they live, about key concepts that they have learned in the English class, okay? So that we can spread the word, right? So one possible activity or even a project could be choose one of the following themes and create a poster to raise awareness within your school community, right? And this can be in the context of this movie, environmental racism, but we can also think about other themes like lack of belonging, invisibility, cultural sensitivity, and awareness, okay? We always have to think about, this big idea, this abstract idea that is reflected in the material that we have chosen, and how can students then talk about that? We can even be more specific and ask them to include an explanation of the theme and remind them, right, who is affected, right? That is to say, who experiences this? How are they affected, right? Describe the impact and also the actions and reflections. What can we do to help, or how should we reflect on this issue, right? Okay. So I would like to finish this presentation with a conclusion I wrote based on this topic, and it reads, I think it's time to take words like critical thinking and inclusive education more seriously. The first step is to reflect on our own practices and the materials we use, and to start thinking about how we can move toward an English language education that challenges rather than reinforces unequal power structures, and that equip students with the tools to question these hegemonic dynamics, both in the English-speaking world and in their own societies. So I would like to thank everyone for listening to this presentation, for choosing this session. And I would like to say that if you are interested in this topic and would like to chat, feel free to contact me at my email, melisamiralles@gmail.com, and I would be very excited to talk about these topics with you and in more conversations. Bye-bye.